There is a kind of darkness that has nothing to do with the absence of light. It lives in stone walls that have absorbed too many years of suffering. It lives in the sound of chains dragged across cold floors before the sun has risen. It lives in the way certain people learn to make themselves smaller, not because they want to, but because smallness is the only armor the world has ever allowed them. It lives in the particular silence of a room full of people who have forgotten what it sounds like to speak freely, who move through their days like shadows of themselves, careful and quiet and invisible by necessity rather than choice. This is a story about that kind of darkness. And about the night, after 19 years of it, it finally ended. Her name was Luna Vale. 19 years old. Brown eyes that had seen too much and learned to reveal nothing. Hands calloused from labor that had begun before most children her age had learned to walk without holding something. She slept on a straw mat in a stone room with 11 other girls in the lower quarters of the Blood Moon Pack estate, the part of the building that appeared on no official map, that no visiting dignitary was ever shown, that the Pack Alpha referred to, when he referred to it at all, as simply the quarters. The quarters had a smell. Cold stone and old straw, and the particular exhaustion of bodies that never fully rest. Luna had stopped noticing it years ago. When you live inside something long enough, it stops being a detail and starts being the entire world. She woke every morning before the bell. Not because she was eager for the day. Not because anything in her waking life gave her reason to hurry toward it. She woke early because in the 11 minutes between her own waking and the bell that would summon every slave in the quarters to their stations, she had something that almost resembled privacy. 11 minutes in which no one was watching her. 11 minutes in which she was not property. She used those minutes the same way every morning. She crossed to the cracked mirror propped against the far wall. The only personal object she had ever been permitted to keep, salvaged from a rubbish pile when she was 12, the glass fractured diagonally so that her reflection always appeared in two pieces, slightly misaligned. She stood in front of it. She looked at herself. And she said the only thing she had ever found worth saying at that hour. Survive today. Just today. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not some distant imagined future in which the world was different. Tomorrow was a promise the world had never once made for her, and she had learned very early in her life not to spend energy on promises. Only today. Only right now. Only the next step in front of her and the one after that. It was not hope exactly. But it was something. And something Luna had decided a long time ago was enough to keep moving. That particular morning, the morning everything began to change, though she did not know it yet, she woke to a sound that did not belong. Voices outside the quarters. Not the usual pre-dawn shuffle of night guards changing shifts. Not the distant bark of a pack elder moving through the estate. These voices were hurried. Purposeful. The kind of voices that accompany news that has not yet been announced, but is already moving through a place the way water moves through a crack in stone, quiet, unstoppable, finding every gap before anyone has thought to seal it. Luna went still in her mirror. In a place where every shift in routine carried risk, where anything unexpected was more likely to mean punishment than opportunity, she had developed the ability to read the texture of sound the way other people read faces. And the texture of these voices said something has changed. She did not know what. She filed it away. She turned from the mirror, pulled on her work clothes in the dark, and waited for the bell. The Blood Moon Pack estate in the gray light of that particular morning looked exactly as it always did and felt entirely different. Luna noticed it the moment she stepped into the main hall for morning assignments, a specific quality of agitation in the air, the kind that precedes something large. The senior slaves moved faster than usual. The pack members who passed through spoke to each other in low, clipped sentences. Even the light seemed charged with something that had not yet arrived. She kept her eyes down. She collected her assignment. She moved. This was the first and most essential rule of survival in the quarters. Move with purpose and make no eye contact. An Omega who looked purposeful was an Omega with somewhere to be. An Omega with somewhere to be was an Omega nobody had reason to stop. Stop, and you become visible. Become visible, and you become a target. Luna had not been stopped unnecessarily in 3 weeks. She considered this a personal achievement. She was nearly in the corridor when Vera appeared. There are people in this world whose cruelty is loud, explosive, dramatic, the kind you can track and prepare for. And then there are people whose cruelty is quiet, architectural, built into every interaction so thoroughly that you stop noticing it is cruelty at all and begin to think of it simply as weather. Vera was the second kind. Head slave mistress of the Blood Moon quarters for 11 years. 40-something, sharp-featured, impeccably turned out, with the particular posture of someone who has built their entire sense of self on the premise that they're above the room they are standing in. She stopped in front of Luna the way a door stops a corridor, completely, without apology, as if the space had always belonged to her and Luna had simply wandered into it. You left a smudge on the Alpha's throne room floor, Vale. Do it again, and I will make sure you scrub it with your face. Luna kept her eyes down. Her expression did not change. Her voice did not change. Yes, Mistress Vera. It will not happen again. She had learned a long time ago that the only safe response to Vera was perfect stillness. Any flicker of emotion, anger, hurt, defiance, even gratitude when Vera occasionally chose mercy, was a thread Vera would pull until something unraveled. So Luna gave her nothing. She had become very good at giving nothing. Vera moved on. And the moment she was gone, a hand closed around Luna's wrist and pulled her sideways into a narrow alcove between two storage shelves. Seraphine. Luna's only friend in the quarters, and in truth the only friend she had ever had anywhere, 18, slight, with clever dark eyes and the specific kind of warmth that survives in cold places because it has no other choice. Seraphine was shaking with barely contained energy, the way she always shook when she had news too large for her body to hold quietly. "Have you heard?" she whispered. "The Alpha King. Caius Blackthorn himself. He is coming here today. They say he is choosing new territories to bring under his rule. Luna, the king of all packs, is going to walk through this hall." Luna looked at her friend. She thought about the voices she had heard before dawn. She thought about the agitation in the air, the clipped conversations, the charged quality of the morning. And then she did what she always did with information that her survival depended on ignoring. "Kings do not notice slaves, Seraphine. Keep your head down and let us survive today." She walked away. She felt Seraphine watching her go. She did not look back. If you are new here and this story is already pulling you in the way I think it is, please subscribe right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a single episode of this story, because what is coming in the next few minutes is the moment that will change absolutely everything. The arrival ceremony was held at the main gates of the estate in the middle of the afternoon. The entire Blood Moon pack was assembled, warriors in ranked formation, elders in their ceremonial robes, pack members arranged by hierarchy in descending order outward from the gates. Luna was assigned to the water detail, which placed her at the very outer edge of the assembly, kneeling with a tray, head down, as invisible as the stone beneath her. She heard him before she saw him. The sound of hoofbeats, not the ordinary rhythm of horses moving at pace, but something that seemed to build from the ground itself, a vibration that moved through the earth before it reached the ears, the way thunder announces itself through the body before the sound arrives. The assembled pack went completely silent. And then, one by one, every person around Luna dropped into a bow so deep and so synchronized that it looked less like a gesture of respect and more like something they had no choice about, like trees bending in wind. Not because they decided to bend, but because the force arriving was simply too large to stand against. Luna kept her eyes on the ground. She was very good at keeping her eyes on the ground. She had been practicing for 19 years. She heard his retinue pass through the gates. She heard the sound of boots on stone. She heard the assembled wolves hold their breath collectively, the way a room holds its breath when something irreversible is about to happen. And then she heard footsteps stop. Not slowing. Not hesitating. Stopping completely, suddenly, with the particular quality of a sound that has been cut rather than finished. 10 feet from where she knelt. She did not look up. Every instinct she had ever developed screamed at her to stay down, stay invisible, stay nothing. These instincts had kept her alive for 19 years. They were not instincts she overrode lightly. And yet, something moved along her spine. A wave of warmth that had no business being there, slow, strange, overwhelming, rising from the base of her back to the crown of her head like sunlight moving across a floor. Her hands tightened on the tray. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself to breathe. She told herself to stay down. She raised her eyes anyway. He was already looking at her. He was tall in the way that certain people are tall, not just physically but dimensionally, as though he occupied more space than his body actually required. Dark hair, dark coat, eyes the color of deep water in winter. The kind of face that had been built for authority, that wore command the way other people wore expressions. Not as something performed, but as something structural, something that would be there even in sleep. He was the most dangerous-looking person Luna had ever seen in her life. He was the most still person she had ever seen. And he was looking at her with an expression she had never had directed at her before, focused, searching, stripped of every layer of performance. As though everything else in the assembled crowd had simply ceased to exist, and there was only this, only her, only the 10 feet of air between them that he seemed to be measuring. Somewhere beside him, his beta spoke in a voice low enough to be private. "My king. You have gone completely still." And Caius Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Northern Territory, the most feared supernatural ruler alive, said, barely audible, in a voice that moved like weather in a closed room, "Who is that girl?" Luna felt it then. Not the warmth this time, but something beneath it, something older and more fundamental, something she had no name for because nothing in her 19 years had prepared her vocabulary for it. It was recognition. It was the feeling of a key turning in a lock she had not known existed inside her. It was being struck by lightning in a room with no storm, in a sky with no clouds. It was, and she would not understand this until much later, the particular sensation of something waking up inside her that had been sleeping since the day she was born. She did not understand any of that at the moment. In the moment she understood only that a king had stopped walking because of her, that his eyes were on her face, and that every survival instinct she possessed was now in direct and catastrophic conflict with something she had never felt before and had no idea what to do with. He took one step toward her. The afternoon was interrupted. The ceremony moved on. The moment was swallowed by the machinery of official proceedings, and Luna was reassigned to the hall, and the world continued its turning as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something had shifted at a level beneath words, beneath rank, beneath 19 years of chains and survival strategies and mirrors with fractured glass. Something that could not be unshifted. Luna carried it into the hall with her, and said nothing to anyone, and kept her eyes down and her face empty and her breathing even. And inside, in the place she had learned to keep locked and quiet and private, something that had been sleeping her entire life stirred in the dark and did not go back to sleep. The formal negotiations between King Caius and the Blood Moon Pack Alpha began that evening in the Great Hall. Luna was assigned to serve at the perimeter. She was not supposed to be visible. She was very good at not being visible. She moved along the edges of the room with her head down and her tray steady and her attention carefully trained on nothing. And Caius Blackthorn, sitting at the head of the negotiation table with every appearance of absolute authority, had not heard a single word the Blood Moon Alpha said in 20 minutes. His beta, Damon, leaned close enough to be quiet about it. "You have not heard a word in 20 minutes. She is a slave, Damon." The words came out low and controlled and furious at himself, the particular fury of a man who knows exactly what is happening inside him and cannot make it stop. "She is your mate, my king." The goddess does not consult the social register before she decides these things. Caius said nothing. He found Luna across the room without appearing to look for her, a skill that suggested he had been tracking her exact location since the moment he walked in. She was moving, serving, invisible to every person in that hall except the one person whose attention she could not afford. Near the wall, positioned with the careful casualness of someone who has made a long study of noticing things without appearing to notice anything, Vera watched the direction of the king's gaze. Her eyes traveled from Caius's face to Luna's back. And then her expression shifted, not dramatically, not in any way that anyone nearby would have named, but in the quiet, considered way of someone who has just recognized an opportunity and is already deciding how to use it. Luna, moving through the room with her tray, saw none of it. She would pay for that later. She would pay for it in ways she had not yet imagined and could not have prepared for. But that was still ahead of her, still hidden inside the hours that had not yet arrived. For now, she served and moved and kept her face empty and breathed, and tried very hard to stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, and failed, quietly and completely, every single time she tried. The night came down over the Blood Moon estate the way all nights came there, without ceremony, without comfort, with the particular weight of a darkness that had been the same for as long as anyone in the quarters could remember. The other girls slept. Seraphine had waited up, curled on her mat with her dark eyes wide and full of questions she was barely containing. Luna told her in whispers. Not everything, she was too careful for everything, even with Seraphine. But enough. The moment at the gate. The way he had stopped. The way he had looked. He asked your name? Seraphine's voice had gone to something between reverence and alarm. Luna, that is not nothing. It is nothing. It was a moment of curiosity. Men like him do not develop feelings for girls like me. They develop sports. What if the goddess put you in front of him for a reason? Don't. The word came out sharper than she intended. She softened it with silence and then with the quieter truth beneath it. The goddess forgot about me a long time ago, Seraphine. Do not build things out of a single look from a powerful man. Those structures fall, and they take you down with them. She curled onto her mat. She turned her face to the wall. She lay completely still in the darkness and listened to the sounds of the quarters settling into sleep around her and told herself she was tired and told herself to rest and did not sleep for a long time. She was thinking about him. She was furious at herself for thinking about him. She thought about him anyway. Before the dawn bell, she was at the forest edge collecting herbs. A task assigned to her daily that she had long considered one of the only mercies in her life. 20 minutes at the tree line where the pack's reach was slightly loosened and the air smelled like living things rather than stone. She moved through the undergrowth with a small basket, her fingers finding the plants by habit and touch, her mind already organized around the day ahead. She heard footsteps. She turned. Caius Blackthorn was standing 10 feet away, alone, in clothes that said he had come here to train rather than to be seen. He had clearly not expected her. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that suggested he was recalculating something. You're up early, he said. Slaves do not have the luxury of sleeping in, my king. Something moved across his face. Discomfort. Something adjacent to shame, swiftly controlled. You do not have to call me that when no one is watching. She considered him carefully. What would I call you? Caius. She tested it silently, just against her lips, not quite aloud. He watched her do it. That feels dangerous, she said. Most true things are, he said, and stepped closer. She did not step back. This surprised her. It surprised him too, she could see it, the slight stillness that moved through him when she held her ground, as though he had prepared for retreat and had to reorient himself around its absence. He reached out slowly, with a carefulness that felt deliberate and considered, and removed a leaf that had caught in her hair during her work. His fingers barely grazed her temple. Both of them went completely still in the aftermath of the contact, standing in the early morning forest with the sounds of the waking estate in the distance, neither of them speaking, neither of them moving. The air between them changed in some way that could not be unchanged. Then voices. His men, stirring, moving toward the tree line for the morning's training. He stepped back. The wall came up. Everything closed. Go back, he said, his voice controlled and level and entirely too careful, before someone sees you out here. She went. In the trees on her way back, basket over her arm, she made herself breathe slowly and deliberately and think about nothing except the path in front of her. She was not entirely successful. She did not see Vera, standing at an upper window of the estate, watching her emerge from the tree line. She did not see the expression on Vera's face. She did not know that her 11 minutes of daily almost privacy, the mercy she had counted on for 3 years, had just become the most dangerous thing about her. The formal dinner that evening placed Luna at the serving stations of the high table, the worst possible assignment, in terms of proximity to power, and yet the assignment Vera had requested for her specifically. For reasons Luna was not yet able to see. She moved along the high table with practiced efficiency, keeping her eyes on trays and goblets and the small mechanics of service, carefully training her attention away from the man at the center of the table. Caius was flanked on one side by the Blood Moon Alpha and his senior wolves, and on the other by visiting pack nobility, among them a woman called Lady Isolde, highborn, composed, extraordinarily beautiful in the cold, precise way of someone who has never been anything other than valued, who rested her hand on the king's arm with the casual familiarity of a claim already made in her own mind, if not yet formalized anywhere else. Luna reached Caius's position with the wine. Their hands met on the goblet stem for a half-second that was not accidental on her part and not accidental on his, and lasted precisely long enough for Isolde, whose attention was professionally calibrated for exactly this kind of detail, to notice. "Your king seems distracted by the help tonight," she said, with the particular sweetness of a woman delivering venom in a wine glass. Caius turned his head toward her with the speed and quality of attention that precedes something irreversible. "Choose your next words very carefully, Isolde." The table went quiet in a radius of 4 seats in each direction. Isolde smiled and withdrew her hand from his arm and said nothing further. Luna moved away, back to the edges, back to invisibility, her face arranged in the practiced blankness of a person who was not listening, who had not heard, who had not felt the warmth of being defended spread through her chest like the first real heat she had been near in years. She felt it anyway. Quietly, privately, in the place she kept locked. The library was the 3rd floor east wing, restricted to pack members of ranked standing and above, which made Luna's presence there, long after midnight, a punishable offense of meaningful severity. She had known this for the 3 years she had been coming here. She had come anyway. The old scholar who taught her to read had done her an enormous accidental kindness, and she had been unwilling to let it go to waste simply because the world disagreed with her having it. She opened the library door and found Caius already there. He was sitting at the far end of the room with a book and a single candle, and he looked up when she entered, and he did not look surprised. "You can read," he said. "Will you report me?" "To whom?" "I am the highest authority you would be reported to." He gestured to the chair across from him. She stood in the doorway for a long time, running every calculation she knew how to run. Then she crossed the room and sat. "What do you read?" he asked. "Everything I can reach. History. Mythology. Maps of territories I will never see." "You want to travel?" "I want to be free. Traveling is simply what I would do with it." The silence that followed was not the silence of nothing being said. It was the silence of something being considered very carefully by a man who chose his words the way other people chose weapons, deliberately, with full knowledge of their weight. "What if you did not have to travel to be free?" he said. She looked at him. "I do not understand. I am here for 3 more days. Be at the forest at dawn tomorrow." He left. She sat for a long time in the candlelight of a library she was not supposed to be in, staring at a door that had already closed, and listened to herself breathe. She told herself she would not go. She told herself it was dangerous and foolish, and that the heart, when given an inch, takes everything you cannot afford to lose. She told herself this with great conviction and considerable repetition. Then she went to bed. She laid awake until the darkness began to soften at the window. And when the first gray light came, she rose and went to the forest. He was already there. They trained. This was the word for it, the practical, neutral, defensible word for what it was on the surface. He corrected her stance, adjusting her feet, placing his hands on her shoulders with the careful impersonality of instruction. The contact lasted longer than instruction required. Neither of them mentioned this. "You are stronger than you look," he said. She was breathing hard from the sparring. "And you are less terrifying than everyone says." He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the look of a man encountering something unexpected and finding he cannot dismiss it the way he dismisses everything else. "Do not tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain." She laughed. A real one surprised out of her, unguarded, the kind of laugh that belongs to a person who forgets, for a moment, to be careful. He watched her laugh the way a man watches something he has been hungry for without knowing it. And then her sleeve slipped. He saw her arm. The full extent of it, old scars layered over older scars, bruises in the yellow-green of healing, the particular map of damage that accumulates on a body that has been considered available for harm for a very long time. He went completely still. Not with shock, with something far more controlled and far more dangerous than shock. A fury so absolute in its containment that it registered as quiet, the way the deepest cold registers as quiet, the way the things that are most serious about themselves have no need to announce it. "Who did this to you?" he said. "It does not matter." "Luna." "Who?" She looked at him. She heard the rawness in his voice, the thing beneath the control, the thing it cost him to ask, and something in her that had been locked for a very long time opened a crack it had not opened before. "Everyone," she said. "It is what being Omega means. It has always meant that." He reached out and took her wrist with both hands, slowly, carefully, as though the care itself was the point. He turned her arm over. He looked at the scars for a long time, and his expression was that of a man reading something he wishes he had been there to prevent and knows he cannot go back and prevent and is deciding, in real time, what he is going to do about that. "Not anymore," he said. 2 words. Quiet. Absolute. The most serious words she had heard in her life, delivered without drama, without flourish, with only the full weight of a man who meant exactly what he said and had the power to mean it. She did not know what to do with them. She filed them in the locked place, beside the warmth of being defended and the feel of his hands careful on her wrist, and she breathed, and she did not let herself believe them yet. She was not ready to believe them yet. That evening, Vera made her move. Not loudly. Not dramatically. With the quiet, architectural precision that was the signature of everything she did. She went to the Blood Moon Pack Alpha, not to Caius, but to the man who held legal authority over Luna, the man who had owned her since the night her parents died, and she spoke to him in the careful, deferential, deeply pointed way of someone who is weaponizing concern. An Omega had been noticed by the visiting king, she said. There were those who might suggest this reflected poorly on pack discipline. There were those who might wonder whether the girl in question had been making herself available rather than simply being seen. There were those who might argue that the pack's honor required a response. The pack alpha heard what she was actually saying. He was not a subtle man, but he understood leverage when it was handed to him. And he called for Luna. The accusation was made publicly. In front of the assembled pack, in the main hall, where the audience was large enough to make the punishment meaningful and the optics of it serve the purpose of reminding everyone in the quarters what visibility cost. 20 lashes. Then transfer to the border labor camps. Seraphine pushed through the crowd before anyone could stop her. Please. She has done nothing wrong. She has done nothing. And Vera had her removed before she finished the sentence. 2 guards appeared with the efficiency of people who had been waiting for exactly this signal, and Luna watched her friend be pulled from the hall and kept her face empty and her eyes forward and breathed. She did not beg. She had never begged. She had learned very young that begging gave the person holding the power a satisfaction that only encouraged them, that the only thing she could keep when everything else was taken was her own stillness. So she was still. She was brought to the punishment yard. The pack assembled around the edges. The night was cold. She knelt in the dirt and closed her eyes and breathed. She was still breathing when the first blow fell. And then a voice came through the night like a wall coming down. Stop. 1 word. Not shouted. Not desperate. Delivered with the absolute authority of a man who has never once in his life needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. The yard went silent with the speed of a sound being cut at its source. Every person in that space froze where they stood. Luna, kneeling, opened her eyes. Caius Blackthorn walked through the assembled crowd, and they separated in front of him without being told to, the way water separates around something that will not be moved. He placed himself between Luna and the whip and turned to face the Blood Moon Alpha with an expression that was not angry, that was something far past anger, something that had moved through anger and came out the other side into an absolute, considered certainty. "You have raised a hand to what is mine," he said. "That makes it my matter." The silence that followed was the silence of an entire pack collectively understanding something that changed the structure of everything they thought they knew. The word mine. Not said in the heat of the moment. Not impulsive. Said with the full, deliberate weight of a man making a public declaration in front of witnesses, in full knowledge of what it meant and what it would cost, and choosing it anyway. The Blood Moon Alpha's voice came out 3 notes higher than he intended it. "She is Omega-born. By pack law she cannot be claimed as. She is my mate." His voice dropped, and the dropping of it was more threatening than any elevation would have been. "Which makes her queen. And if you raise another hand to my queen, there is no pack law old enough to protect you from what I will do. There is nothing." He turned to Luna. He unclasped his coat, slowly, publicly, watched by every eye in the yard, and settled it over her shoulders. The gesture was not hasty. It was not impulsive. It was the most deliberate thing she had ever seen a person do, and it was done in front of witnesses, and there was no way to misunderstand it. He looked down at her. "Are you hurt? You should not have done that," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. "I know. They will call it weakness. Let them. I have never once cared what they call me. I care what happens to you." She looked up at him. This impossible man, this king who had stopped walking when he saw her, who had learned her name on the first day and said it like it meant something, who had sat across from her in a library she was not supposed to be in and listened to her talk about freedom as though it was a reasonable thing for her to want, and felt the locked place inside her creak open another inch. Just an inch. She was not ready for more than an inch. But an inch was more than it had ever opened before. In the guest chambers that night, with the door guarded by Damon and the estate quiet around them, Caius tended to the single mark that had landed before he arrived, his hands moving with a carefulness that undid her far more than she was prepared for. She had not been touched carefully in so long. She had forgotten it was possible to be touched that way. "You called me your mate," she said. "In front of everyone." "Yes." "Why?" He set down the cloth. He sat across from her and looked at her with the unguarded expression she had been catching at the edges of his face for days, the thing beneath the armor, the thing that was real. "Because you are. The bond recognized you the moment I saw you. I spent 2 weeks telling myself the cost was too high, that the complication was not worth it, that I was imagining something that was not there. I am done with that." "I felt it too," she said quietly. "From the first second." Something released between them. A held breath that had been held since the afternoon at the gates, when he stopped walking and she raised her eyes. "I am afraid, Caius." "Of me? Of hoping? Hope has never been safe for me. Not once." He reached out and took her hand. "Then let me be safe for you." She looked at their hands. She looked at his face. She thought about 19 years of stone rooms and cracked mirrors and 11 minutes of almost privacy and telling herself to survive today, just today. She thought about how the world had looked every morning when she stood at that mirror, and how different the word tomorrow sounded now, in this room, in the dark, with a king holding her hand and meaning it. She was not ready to believe it completely. But she was closer than she had ever been. The morning brought intelligence that changed everything. Damon came to Caius early, with the careful urgency of a man delivering news that cannot wait but must be delivered right. Vera had gone outside the pack. She had sent word to a rival faction, wolves who had been watching Caius's territory for weakness, waiting for a crack in the armor they could put a lever into. She had told them about the mate bond, about the slave girl, about the king who had declared publicly and could not undeclare. She had handed them the one thing they had been unable to find on their own, a reason to believe that Caius Blackthorn could be hurt. "They will come for her, my king. If they cannot reach you directly, they will take what you love and use it to make you bleed." Caius stood at the window. Below, in the courtyard, Luna had found Seraphine alive, shaken but whole, released in the chaos of the previous night's declaration. The two girls stood holding each other in the gray morning light, and even from the height of the window, even at the distance he was watching from, Caius could see that something in Luna's body had changed. Some bracing she had been carrying for so long she had stopped knowing it was there, loosened slightly. Not gone, but loosened. "We leave tonight," he said. "I am taking her home." They came to the forest road. 3 riders who had broken away from the larger engagement when Caius's men intercepted the main force, who had one objective and were moving toward it with the focused efficiency of people who had been paid well and expected to earn it. They came through the trees at Luna's position, and she turned to run, and then she stopped. She stood completely still in the dark between the trees. Something inside her had changed. Not in the hours of the previous day. Not even in the minutes of the road ride north with Caius beside her, his coat on her shoulders, the word home somewhere ahead of them. It had been changing since the afternoon at the gates, since the lock she had not known existed turned for the first time. It had been building in the quiet of the forest mornings and the candlelight of the library, and the moment he said not any more over the map of her scars. And now, standing in the path of 3 wolves who had come to use her as a wound in a king, it reached the end of its patience with being ignored. She turned to face them. For 19 years she had run. She had bent. She had survived by making herself as small and invisible as the world required her to be, and she had believed, because she had been taught to believe it, that smallness was her nature rather than her cage. Standing in the dark of the forest road with 3 wolves between her and whatever came next, she understood that smallness had never actually saved her. It had only delayed what was coming. It had only postponed the breaking. She stopped running. Her wolf came. Not gradually. Not tentatively. Like something that had been locked in a room for 19 years and had just found the door left open, sudden and total and enormous. Silver light, blinding, absolute. A shift that moved through her like a tide going out, like something fundamental being rearranged at the level below bone. What emerged from that light was not the small and dormant Omega wolf she had been told all her life she was. It was massive. Silver white and ancient-looking, luminous in the dark, radiating something that the 3 riders recognized before they could name it, something that made them understand, in the part of themselves below thinking, that they had made a very significant error in their assessment of the situation. They fled. The light faded. Luna shifted back, kneeling in the road, trembling with the newness of it and the oldness of it. It felt new, and it felt like the most familiar thing she had ever experienced, like a name she had been called for the first time that she had always known belonged to her. Caius was beside her before she finished trembling. He dropped to his knees in front of her, and his expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it, something past control, past the armor, past the 5 years of ruling alone with power as a substitute for everything else. "A silver alpha," he said. The bloodline was supposed to be extinct. She stared at him. "What?" "You were never Omega, Luna. You were never Omega. Someone suppressed your wolf, hid what you were, made you believe you were the lowest of everything so that no one would come looking for what you actually are. Someone was afraid of what you would become. Everything rearranged itself. Her parents' deaths, which she had been told were illness, which she had been told were accidents. Her wolf, which she had been told was broken. Every year chains and stone floors and cracked mirrors survived today, just today. Not her nature. Her cage. A cage someone had built around her before she was old enough to know she was inside it. "Who?" she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Someone afraid of what you would become. And we are going to find out who. Together." She looked at him in the dark of the forest road, kneeling in the dirt, silver light still fading at the edges of her vision, the mate bond warm and steady between them like something that had always been there waiting for her to stop running long enough to feel it. She believed him. Not the guarded, careful, 1-inch kind of believing she had been doing all week. Completely. Without the lock. For the first time in her life, without the lock. In the clearing after, when the sounds of the skirmish had faded and his men had withdrawn to give them distance, Caius stood in front of her and reached out and held her face in both hands with the particular care of a man who has learned, late, what it is to be afraid of losing something. "I have ruled alone for 5 years," he said, "because I believed that power was cleaner than vulnerability. You have made me a liar in less than 2 weeks. You were never as cold as you wanted people to think." "Only with you," he said. "Only with you is it ever real." She stepped into him. He wrapped his arms around her and held her the way she had not been held since she was small enough to be held by her mother, with the full weight of someone who intended to stay, who was not practicing for something else, who was present and certain and there. She pressed her face against his chest and breathed, and for the first time in 19 years she breathed without the brace, without the armor, without the constant low vigilance of a person who knows that comfort is borrowed and will be reclaimed. She breathed like someone who was allowed to. "I was born in a collar," she had said in the dark of the slave quarters, to her own reflection, to the cracked glass that had always shown her in pieces. She had said it so many times it had stopped feeling like a fact and started feeling like a definition, not a circumstance she had been born into but a category she belonged to. The lowest. The forgotten. The one the goddess had no plans for. She understood now that she had been lied to. Not just by the world outside her, by the world she had built inside herself out of the materials they had given her, stone and straw, and the word survive said every morning to a fractured mirror. She had been handed a story about who she was, and she had lived inside it because it was the only story she had. And she had not known until a king stopped walking in the middle of a ceremony and looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world full of pretending. She had not known that the story was not true. She was not broken. She had never been broken. She had been hidden. She had been waiting. And the night she finally stopped waiting. The night the lock turned and the wolf woke and the chains that had never been made of iron fell away entirely, she did not feel like someone who had been rescued. She felt like someone who had finally, after 19 years of almost, arrived. The moon was full and high over the forest road when they began to ride north. Caius beside her, not ahead of her. Damon somewhere further back, giving them room. The Blackthorn territory ahead. Unfamiliar, unknown, carrying the particular weight of everything she had never been permitted to imagine for herself. A future. A name that meant something. Tomorrow she was allowed to want. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we go north," he said. "We find who did this to you. And we make sure that no one ever again mistakes you for anything less than what you are." She looked at him in the moonlight. "And what am I?" He looked back at her. His expression was entirely open. No armor, no wall, no controlled distance. Just a man on a road in the dark, next to the person the universe had decided he belonged to, saying the simplest true thing he knew. "Mine," he said. "And your own. Equally." She took his hand. She faced north. She breathed without the brace. "I was born into chains. But I was not born to wear them. And the night the Alpha King said my name like it mattered, like I mattered. That was the night 19 years of survival today finally became something else entirely. That was the night it became live. Not just today. Live. If this story moved you the way I believe it did, if you found yourself holding your breath when Luna raised her eyes at the gate, if you felt the weight of those 2 words not anymore, if something in you recognized the feeling of a locked place finally opening, then this is your sign to subscribe right now and leave a comment below telling me your favorite moment from this episode. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And come back for more stories, because the question of who hid Luna's bloodline and why is only just beginning to be answered. The road north is long. What is waiting at the end of it will change everything again. I will see you there.